In 1989, a little girl vanished without a trace. Decades later, a single forgotten teddy bear unravels a web of betrayal, buried secrets, and a father's darkest sins. What Ethan discovers proves that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who destroy us. The summer air hung thick and still on the night of June 14, 1989, inside the Whitmore home. The hum of the television filled the living room, casting flickering shadows across the worn carpet. 11-year-old Claire Whitmore sat curled at the corner of the couch, her favorite teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest. Beside her, 6-year-old Ethan fought to keep his eyes open, his small body heavy with sleep. The room smelled faintly of popcorn and dust, the kind of ordinary evening no one thought could ever turn into a nightmare. Ethan remembered hearing the muffled laughter of the sitcom on TV before his eyelids gave way. His last memory of that night was Claire whispering, "Don't fall asleep yet," as she reached for the blanket draped across the armrest. But when he awoke hours later, the blanket lay crumpled. The TV screen glared blue static, and the space beside him was empty. Claire was gone. Panic cracked through the stillness. His cries woke his parents, Margaret rushing from the bedroom in her nightgown, Robert stumbling after her. The moment they realized Claire wasn't in the house, everything unraveled. Claire. Margaret's voice sliced through the night as she tore through every room. "Claire, answer me." Robert sprinted outside, barefoot on the gravel, his flashlight beams slashing across the yard and into the dark tree line. No sound, no movement, just the buzzing of cicadas and the hum of the street lamp on the corner. By dawn, police cars lined the street, their flashing lights painting the house in red and blue. Officers combed through the living room, taking photographs of the couch, the teddy bear on the floor, the front door that showed no sign of being forced. Neighbors gathered, whispering theories with hushed urgency. Detectives pressed Ethan for details, but all he could say was, "She was here. Then she wasn't." His small voice cracked under the weight of words he didn't understand. The search stretched through the night. As hours turned into days, silence grew heavier than sound. Claire Whitmore had vanished from her own living room without struggle, without trace. As though the walls themselves had swallowed her whole, the Whitmore family would never be the same again. But the worst was yet to come. The days after, Claire's disappearance dragged like years. The once lively Whitmore home grew cold, its walls echoing with silence where laughter used to live. Curtains stayed drawn, lights left on through the night, as if darkness itself had become an enemy. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to mock the unanswered question, "Where is Claire?" Margaret wandered the house like a ghost, clutching Claire's school photo to her chest until her fingers left prints on the glass. Her grief curdled into rage, and that rage turned toward Robert. "You left the door unlocked?" she accused one night, her voice sharp enough to cut. Robert snapped back, "And where were you? You didn't hear anything either?" The arguments became routine, echoing through the thin walls until Ethan buried his head beneath pillows to block them out. He was too young to understand the complexities of blame, yet old enough to absorb every poisonous word. The phrase "you were right there, and you saw nothing" followed him like a shadow, whispered by neighbors, repeated by relatives, seared into his mind until it felt like confession. Outside the home, theories spread like wildfire. Some whispered Claire had run away, though no one could explain how an 11-year-old slipped into the night unnoticed. Others murmured about strangers, headlights spotted on the street at odd hours. But darker rumors clung stubbornly to the family itself, hints that the truth had never left the walls of the Whitmore living room, as months blurred into years. Ethan grew under the weight of absence. Birthdays passed without candles for Claire, her empty chair at the table a permanent scar. The teddy bear remained in a box in the attic, too painful for Margaret to touch, too haunting for Robert to throw away. The house stood hollow, not just of Claire's laughter, but of trust. And though the case faded from headlines, Ethan knew silence was not close, it was a prison. 15 years later, the past would claw its way back, dragging him into the shadows of memory and unanswered questions. By the time 10 years had passed, Claire's disappearance had become less of a tragedy and more of a story traded in whispers. To the town, she was a ghost, her name spoken with pity, her case cited as one of those unsolved mysteries best left in the past. For the Whitmore silence had calcified into routine. Robert drank more. Margaret withered. Ethan, now 16, carried the kind of heaviness that bent him before his time. But ghosts do not rest. They linger. Ethan's restlessness drove him to the public library, where old newspapers still smelled of dust and neglect. He traced the headlines. Girl vanishes from home. Family begs for answers. Each article felt distant, impersonal, as though Claire were a stranger. Not the sister who once tucked blankets around him. Then came the police reports. Obtained through a sympathetic clerk, the files were thin, unimpressive. Yet within their lines lived details Ethan couldn't ignore. Interviews cut short, timelines inconsistent, statements missing. But one sentence, small and almost overlooked, cut through him like glass. Brother asleep in the same room? The words looped in his mind, an accusation disguised as fact. He'd been there, should have seen, heard something. But the truth was emptier, only silence, only static from the television compelled. Ethan sought out the men who had once searched for his sister. Tired detectives, now gray and weary, shrugged at his questions. Went nowhere, one muttered. Some things just stay buried. But Ethan couldn't let it stay buried. That single line in the file gnawed at him, waking him in the night, whispering that the past wasn't finished with him, and soon memory itself would begin to betray him. Sleep became dangerous. For Ethan, nights were no longer an escape, but an ambush. Dreams twisted into fragment sequels of that summer night in 1989, looping endlessly like broken film. He remembered the glow of the television against Claire's face. Her teddy bear pressed to her chest. But as the dream deepened, the stillness cracked. Shadows moved along the walls. Muffled voices, low and urgent, drifted through the living room. Couldn't make out the words, only the weight of them, sharp, secretive. In one memory, his father's figure appeared in the doorway, keys jingling in his hand. Robert's voice, "I'll be back. Don't wait up." The slam of the front door followed, then his mother's trembling hands pulling the blanket tighter around Ethan's shoulders, whispering, "Go back to sleep." Ethan would wake drenched in sweat, his chest heaving as though he had been running. These weren't ordinary dreams. They felt like pieces of something buried inside him, shards of a truth he had been too young to understand. By day, the images lingered, poisoning his thoughts. Why had Robert left the house so suddenly that night? Why had Margaret acted as if she were hiding something? Why, above all, did Claire's absence feel less like a mystery and more like a decision? He began to notice other details. The way his mother avoided his eyes when he mentioned Claire. The way she locked herself away with whiskey when Robert was gone. Each behavior seemed less like grief and more like fear. The realization clawed at him. What if the monster hadn't come from outside? What if it had lived under his own roof? The thought sickened him, but once it surfaced, it would not let go. And soon his search for the truth would turn directly toward his father. Ethan's search turned inevitably toward his father. Robert. Whitmore had always been a man of closed doors and unfinished sentences. To the outside world, he was steady, blue-collar, reliable. But whispers carried further than Ethan ever realized. He started small. Talking to neighbors who remembered Robert's late-night drives, his car slipping down back roads long after midnight. One, a retired mechanic, muttered, "Your dad was always chasing something, cards, dice. Never enough." At the local bar, Ethan found the rest of the truth. Old patrons remembered Robert's debts, his losses piling high. He owed the wrong kind of people, a man with whiskey breath confessed. The kind who don't forgive. The puzzle sharpened into something horrifying. The same summer, Claire vanished. Robert's debts had reached their peak. Could she have been taken as payment? Or worse, handed over? Ethan carried the suspicion to Margaret. He found her in the kitchen, hands trembling. Around a glass of water. "Mom," he whispered. "What did Dad do? What do you know?" Her eyes darted to the floor. For a moment, she seemed about to speak, but fear locked her throat. "Don't ask me that," she murmured, voice breaking. "You don't want those answers," but Ethan did. The silence felt like complicity, a wound festering in their home for 15 years. He left her trembling at the counter. Realizing her quiet was not ignorance, it was terror. The man behind closed doors was no longer just his father. He was a threat lurking in the shadows of their past, and Ethan was about to pry those doors open. Margaret Whitmore had become a ghost of the woman Ethan once knew. Time had hollowed her cheeks, thinned her voice, and left her house smelling of dust and old sorrow. When Ethan returned one evening to confront her again, she sat in the dim light of the kitchen, a shawl wrapped around her narrow shoulders, her hands trembling around a cold cup of tea. "Mom," Ethan began softly, pulling out a chair across from her. "I need the truth." No more silence. Her eyes flickered to his face, then away, as though truth itself was a flame she couldn't hold her gaze upon. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her lips parted, and words came like broken glass. "That night, I heard it," she whispered. The door opening, Robert's voice. He told someone, "Take her, quickly." Ethan's breath hitched, and you did nothing. Her shoulders collapsed inward, shame bowing her like a weight she had carried for 15 years. "I was afraid, Ethan. Afraid of what he'd do to me. To you, he was already a stranger in our home, full of rage, secrets I didn't dare question. If I had stopped him, if I had screamed," her voice cracked, dissolving into tears, "maybe you'd both be gone." The words struck like a knife. His mother hadn't been blind, she had been complicit through silence. Her grief was not only for Claire, but for the cowardice that had kept her alive. "I don't know what happened after," she said, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. "I never saw her again, but I hear her voice every night. I hear her crying." Ethan's fists clenched on the table. The truth was fractured, incomplete, but enough to shatter his image of family. His mother had chosen survival over justice, and if she couldn't tell him the rest, he would have to find it himself. Upstairs, in the attic, Claire's belongings waited, and with them the teddy bear. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten years. Boxes were stacked like tombstones, each one marked with faded handwriting. Claire's room, summer clothes, toys. Ethan climbed the creaking steps slowly, a flashlight beam cutting through the cobwebs. His mother's confession still rang in his ears, but it was not enough. He needed something concrete, proof, not whispers. He opened the first box with shaking hands. Old school books, a pair of worn shoes, ribbons yellowed with time. Then, buried beneath layers of fabric, his fingers brushed against something soft. The teddy bear. Its fur was dull, patches worn thin where Claire's hands once held it close. For a long moment, Ethan just stared, memories pressing in her laughter, her voice calling his name the way she'd never sleep without it. He brought it to his chest, inhaling the faint scent of dust and childhood long gone. But unease gnawed at him. Stitching along its back looked uneven, a clumsy repair. Trembling fingers, Ethan pulled at the seam until the thread snapped. He tore carefully, his heart pounding as stuffing spilled onto the attic floor. Something crackled within. A small packet wrapped in yellowed paper. He unfolded it with dread, clawing his throat. Inside lay a note, written in Claire's familiar, looping handwriting, shaky and hurried. He said, "He'll take me to the river. Don't tell Mommy." The words blurred as Ethan's vision swam with rage and grief. Claire had left a message, hidden in the only place she thought safe, the teddy bear wasn't just a relic of childhood. It was her voice preserved in silence for 15 years, and now it pointed him to the river. The note had given him a destination, and Ethan couldn't ignore it. On a gray morning in 2004, he drove to the old river dock, a place long abandoned, where wooden planks sagged under the weight of years. The air smelled of damp earth and algae, the river whispering with a current that seemed to pull secrets into its depths. Ethan walked slowly across the dock, his shoes creaking against the rotting boards. He tried to imagine Claire here, 11 years old, clutching her teddy bear while his father's shadow loomed. The thought twisted his stomach into knots. At a nearby diner, he asked around. The locals, older now, exchanged glances before speaking. One woman finally admitted, "Your dad's car was seen out here that night? Headlights off. Strange hour." Another lowered his voice. I remember a man saying he saw Robert carrying something heavy into the woods, like a bundle. Swore, he told the police, but nothing came of it. The words chilled Ethan. He dug deeper, visiting the county archives. Weeks of searching unearthed what he feared buried within police files was a witness statement, half smudged with ink, marked inadmissible. It described Robert Whitmore at the river, shoulders hunched, carrying something wrapped in cloth. The report had been ignored, pushed aside. The betrayal sank in like poison. This was no random abduction, no faceless predator. His father had led Claire away, standing at the edge of the riverbank. Ethan stared at the water, the current carrying reflections of the clouds above. Stored rage and sorrow collided inside him, threatening to consume him. His father wasn't just a broken man with debts. He was the architect of Claire's disappearance, and if Robert had secrets this deep, Ethan knew there was more waiting to surface, truths tangled in betrayal and bloodlines. The river had given Ethan a direction, but the trail of his father's past open doors he wished had stayed closed. In town, he began seeking out the people who once orbited Robert Whitmore, the drinking buddies, the card players, the women who whispered his name with a mixture of contempt and fear. It didn't take long before one name surfaced: Lydia Cole. In 1989, she had been younger, vibrant, and married to someone else. Now she lived alone at the edge of town, her voice sharp with years of bitterness when Ethan knocked at her door. "You're Robert's boy," she said flatly, eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" "I want the truth," Ethan replied. Her laugh was brittle. "Truth? Your father never told anyone the truth, but yes, there was something between us. And yes, it was dangerous. He owed money, he owed loyalty, he owed me. But Robert only ever paid with other people's lives." Ethan's chest tightened. Did she know? Lydia's eyes flickered, as if Ethan had touched the wound she'd hidden for decades. "Children see more than you think." Maybe she overheard him. Maybe she was leverage. "Either way, your father wasn't the victim everyone pretends he was. He played with fire, and someone, maybe all of us, got burned." Her words left Ethan sickened. The image of Claire no longer vanished by chance. It was tangled in Robert's web of betrayals, debts, and forbidden desires. That night, Ethan sat in his car, staring at the river in the distance, his hands shaking on the wheel. His father had not just been flawed. He had been something darker, predatory, willing to sacrifice even family to protect himself. The next step was clear. If Robert was still alive, Ethan needed answers from the man himself. The hospice room smelled of disinfectant and smoke residue, as though Robert Whitmore's past clung stubbornly to him, even as his body wasted away. His chest rattled with each breath, a cruel reminder of the years he had chain-smoked himself toward this end. Ethan stood by the door for a long moment, uncertain whether he had come seeking answers or vengeance. Robert opened his eyes slowly, clouded yet piercing. A faint, sardonic smile curved his lips. "So the boy finally comes home," he rasped. Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady but cold. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for Claire." The name seemed to sting. Robert's smile faltered, and for the first time something almost human flickered across his face, shame or perhaps regret. He coughed, struggling for air, before forcing words out. "Always her. After all these years." Ethan leaned forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "Where is she? What did you do?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rattle of Robert's breath. Then with a voice as brittle as ash, he said, "I didn't kill her." Ethan's heart lurched. "Then what happened?" Robert's gaze drifted toward the window, as though searching for a place to hide from his sons. "Eyes I owed men, dangerous men. Gambling debts I couldn't crawl out of. They wanted blood, money, something to prove I was good for it. And Claire." His throat closed, his voice cracking. "I gave her away. She was leverage, a payment, a bargaining chip." The words fell like stones. Ethan staggered back, nausea rising. "You gave her away? She was your daughter?" "She was my weakness," Robert muttered, coughing violently into a stained handkerchief. "They promised she wouldn't be hurt. that she'd be looked after better than I ever could. Ethan's eyes burned. You expect me to believe that? That you sold your child and convinced yourself she was safe? Robert's gaze returned. To him, sharp despite the fading life in his body, believe what you want. But I never saw her die. That's the truth. Whatever else you think of me, he wheezed, his chest heaving, I didn't put her in the ground. Ethan's fury wavered, colliding with doubt. Was his father confessing or manipulating him one last time? The man had lied his whole life. Why stop now? He wanted to scream, to strangle him, to demand every last detail. But Robert's strength was already slipping. His hand trembled as he tried to reach for the bedside table. Grasping at a cigarette lighter, he no longer had the breath to use. His eyes met Ethan's one final time, softer now, almost pleading. Find her, Robert whispered, barely audible. She's still out there, somewhere. No. Then the rattle in his chest stilled. His body sagged, lifeless, leaving Ethan staring at a corpse that had taken its secrets to the grave. Ethan stood frozen, his own breath shallow, heart hammering. The confession had given him both everything and nothing, truth twisted with lies, closure poisoned with doubt. As he walked out into the night, the air smelled faintly of smoke, as though Robert's sins had seeped into the earth itself. But one thing burned clear in Ethan's mind. The search wasn't over. If Claire's fate had been sealed in betrayal, then only the shadows of the past could reveal where she truly was. The house felt hollow without Robert's presence, though his absence brought no peace. Instead, every corner echoed with unspoken scenes. And Ethan could not escape the weight of what his father had confessed or refused to confess. On the quiet aftermath of death, the only thing that mattered was the teddy bear. Stitched back together, it seems holding more than fabric. Inside it rested the fragile note that had become Claire's final whisper. He sat at the kitchen table. The yellowed paper unfolded before him, its childish scrawl a cruel reminder of innocence lost. He said, he'll take me to the river. Tell Mommy. Claire's small hand had written those words in fear. And now, decades later, it was all Ethan had left of her voice. The next morning, Ethan walked into the police precinct with the bear and the note. The detectives, some too young to have even been born when Claire vanished, examined it with furrowed brows. For the first time in years, her name was spoken officially, entered again into files, evidence logs, and whispers between officers. They promised him the case would be reopened, that they would follow the trail where it led. But bureaucracy moved slower than grief. Weeks passed and Ethan received updates filled with words like review, reassess, re-examine. Every promise was laced with hesitation, as though reopening old wounds risked more than healing them. One evening, after another call that ended with polite assurances and no answers, Ethan returned home and lowered himself into the worn armchair in the living room. The house groaned softly in the night air, carrying memories he could not silence. He picked up the teddy bear, running his fingers over its patched seams. It looked ordinary now, but he knew it wasn't. It carried the weight of truth, of secrets. Sewn into silence as he held it close, he felt both comforted and tormented. The bear was Claire's last relic, her presence trapped inside a relic of childhood, and his reminder that justice was never absolute. Some questions would forever remain unanswered. Lingering like shadows in the corners of the room, Ethan closed his eyes, clutching the bear tightly. Ghosts, he realized, did not haunt places, they haunted people. And some never left.